Hey folks, Arlyeon here, welcoming you to this week's episode of Critical Review. Today, I'll be talking about Wadjet Eye Unavowed, which manages to bring some interesting twists to the point-and-click adventure genre in the way it approaches its gameplay and puzzle solving, as well as the manner in which it applies them to the way it tells its story. And I'll spare a moment here to give a special thanks to Dave Gilbert for providing a review copy of the game. So, to kick all this off, the skeleton of the story is simple enough to explain. You're a schmuck who ends up sharing his body with a malevolent spirit whose misadventures you get to briefly witness in a nifty prologue section. Cue taking part in an exorcism gone wrong that leaves you with the career option of do not pass go, straight to jail, or being more or less press-ganged into joining the supernatural equivalent of a detective agency. Or, I guess, maybe, like, troubleshooters? Pest control. You know what I mean. Anyways, it's a fairly amicable press-ganging, circumstances being what they are, but still. And thus begins the paranormal hijinks which makes up the main plot as you roam New York with your newfound companions trying to find out what the hell happened and why. That said, there is a lot of meat to the story, not only in the emphasis that was placed on fleshing out the world at large, the game's various characters, and the plot, but also in providing the players different routes by which they could explore that story. For instance, players are granted during the prologue section the ability to choose their gender, an aesthetic choice really, but also their background. And now this particular decision not only provides entirely different backstories and introduces them to different central characters in ways that are reflected later in the story, it also influences the way in which they communicate with other characters and provides players different shards of insight into the strange events occurring in the city. And this storyline branching is hardly limited to just the players pertaining to, well, their avatar, as you also get to choose which stories you'll be investigating first, which can impact things to some degree, but more importantly, who you bring on these misadventures. And see, despite being a point-and-click adventure, you essentially have an adventuring party, where you get to choose 2 out of what ends up ultimately being 4 companions to solve mysteries with. And there's a lot of effort put into the dialogue with these characters, whether it be chatting with them to learn backstory in the central hub area, awkwardly hanging on the subway as you travel between locations, or just listening to the 2 companions you choose for mission bantering in the background as you explore the game's areas and solve puzzles. It's a genuinely nice touch, and the bits of backstory and reactions and interactions made it enticing enough that I went through the game more than once with different characters just to see how things were different. Though, while the game's endings were interesting, I did find it noticeable that the main portion of the ending mostly boils down to a crossroad of decisions at the very climax of the game, with the epilogue, if you get there, being what's influenced by your, air quote, moral decisions. Now when it comes to the game itself, Unavowed is a point-and-click, yet it avoids falling into some of the more vexsome traps of its peers. You won't ever find yourself pixel hunting, which is a major blessing, and because of the party system that I mentioned in the story segment, many of the puzzles end up having multiple means by which to solve them, with the NPCs you bring along also being able to provide hints as to what to do next should you get stuck. The result is that there's a number of different ways to progress forward through the game, which makes discovering them not only feel rewarding, but which also provides a certain degree of incentive to try some of the areas with a different party, just to see the different manners in which you could resolve some of the puzzles. I'll admit it felt pretty clever at times, and managed to serve as a very solid anti-frustration mechanism, since I could confidently advance through the game, knowing that I generally had everything I needed to progress without having to worry about becoming unable to advance because I didn't pick the right person. It was also neat to see how differently the final segment of the game could play out based on your choices. Altogether, the gameplay really is a strong element of it, with a very special nod towards the fact that it managed to not only have replayability, but to a degree that had me playing fully for a second time and then checking out the 3rd character intro. There's a lot to be had, both narratively and gameplay-wise, and you achievement hunters in the audience won't be disappointed either.
Rewrites. We open next week.
When it comes to sound design, Wadjet Eye has a penchant for including voice acting in their titles, and Unavowed is no exception, with a fairly diverse and talented cast at their disposal, and with a notable voice serving as a cameo for the dev, Dave Gilbert. I personally enjoyed the flavor that it brought to the game. The segment in Wall Street with Mandela is an absolute treat, and I got to learn how to say champagne. The music accompaniment was also fairly solid, as it's both enjoyable and manages to enhance the dramatic pacing of many moments in the game. Seriously, some of the left motifs carry some solid oomph behind them. Really, the only downside that came to mind was a brief couple times over the course of the 16 hours I put into the game where I heard a mic pop, and those were few and far between. That aside, I don't have anything but good to say about the game's sound and music. Visually, Unavowed is not only an appealing title, it's also very clean and easy to navigate, which is lovely given its nature as a point and click. The interface is intuitive, and the world at large is navigable that you won't find yourself ever really lost or clicking around pixel hunting. On a more aesthetic note, the character and creature designs are a lot of fun, with special shout out to Eli for occasionally looking like a cross between Constantine and a sad puppy. And the environments themselves are absolutely fun to explore and manage to look natural enough that I was sometimes surprised I couldn't click into a random building. With all this said, whilst I don't tend to focus on point-and-click games, this definitely falls amidst those I've played that I vigorously recommend, especially if you're in the mood for something with not only a decent story and some solid twists down the line, but some enjoyable puzzle solving. The fact there were multiple ways to overcome the myriad obstacles remained a high point for me throughout the playthroughs, simply because it meant I could retain a sense of discovery as I continued to barrel forward, and I got to feel rewarded in my choice of characters. Overall, I'd actually consider this game a critical hit. Now, with all this said and done, this wraps up this episode of Critical Review, folks. For those who have stuck it out till the credits, I'd like to offer up a big thanks for hearing me out. Let me know for good or ill what you thought of this episode in the comments, and if you agree or disagree with my assessment. Beyond that, if you want to see more reviews, dev interviews, or just indie or tabletop gaming stuff, hit that subscribe icon and click the bell to get future notifications. Anyways, I'll catch you later, folks.